the billionaire's bride, tore the housekeeper's uniform. Then she saw the scar that stopped every heart. No one expected an elegant engagement celebration to end in complete silence. The orchestra was still playing. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Laughter echoed through the mansion as Greenville's most influential families toasted Ethan Carter and his beautiful fiancée, Charlotte Brooks. Then Charlotte lost her temper. She stormed across the ballroom, seized the housekeeper by the collar, and ripped her uniform in front of everyone. The room erupted with shocked gasps. Charlotte smiled proudly, convinced she had finally put the maid in her place. But the smile disappeared almost instantly. A long surgical scar stretched across the woman's upper chest, catching the warm light from the chandelier. Ethan froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He knew that scar. He had spent 12 years searching for the woman who carried it, and the truth about to unfold would destroy everything his guests believed about wealth, gratitude, and dignity. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories every week. Grace Bennett was 35 years old. For nearly a decade, she had quietly cleaned some of the largest homes in Connecticut without anyone remembering her name. She worked carefully. She spoke softly. She smiled even when life gave her every reason not to. Most mornings, she hummed old hymns while polishing expensive marble floors. Nobody realized those songs helped hide memories she could never erase. 8 months earlier, Ethan Carter had hired her through a domestic staffing agency after several employees praised her honesty. He never asked many questions. Grace never volunteered any answers. She simply arrived before sunrise, worked until evening, and returned home to her 10-year-old son, Noah. Every dollar mattered. Every hour counted. She never removed the tiny silver pendant resting beneath her uniform. She also refused to wear clothing that exposed her shoulders. Even during the hottest summer afternoons, the other employees assumed she was simply shy. They had no idea she was hiding the scar that reminded her every day of the greatest decision she had ever made. Charlotte Brooks noticed Grace immediately. Not because Grace did anything wrong, but because Grace refused to react. Charlotte enjoyed power. She enjoyed watching people become nervous around her. When Grace remained calm, Charlotte considered it disrespect. She criticized the way Grace folded towels. She complained about fingerprints that weren't there. Sometimes she deliberately left expensive makeup scattered across the bedroom just to accuse Grace of being careless. Grace apologized every time, even when she had done nothing wrong. The only person who openly defended her was Ethan's 9-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma adored Grace. Whenever school ended, she searched the mansion until she found the gentle housekeeper. "Can you braid my hair?" Emma would ask. "Can you teach me that song again?" Grace never refused. She treated Emma with the same tenderness she showed her own son. Emma often whispered, "Your hugs feel like my grandma's." Grace would simply smile, while secretly wiping away tears after the little girl walked away. Charlotte hated seeing them together. One afternoon, she deliberately knocked an expensive porcelain vase onto the floor. The crash echoed through the hallway. Seconds later, Charlotte pointed directly at Grace. "Look what you've done!" Grace looked down at the broken pieces in confusion. I wasn't even near it." Charlotte folded her arms. "So now you're calling me a liar?" Emma tugged on her father's jacket. "Dad, Grace didn't do it." Ethan looked from Charlotte to Grace. He wanted to believe his daughter, but investors were waiting. Phone calls demanded attention. Wedding plans filled every spare moment. "I'll deal with this later," he muttered before walking away. Grace quietly knelt to collect the broken pieces. Emma stayed beside her. "I'm sorry," the little girl whispered. Grace smiled gently. "Kindness always matters, sweetheart, even when nobody notices." She had no idea Ethan overheard those words from the hallway, and somehow, they stayed with him. The engagement gala arrived 2 weeks later. The Carter estate looked like something from a movie. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Television personalities mingled with business executives. Champagne flowed freely. Charlotte wanted perfection. She wanted every guest to remember her as the woman who married one of Connecticut's youngest billionaires. Hours before the celebration, she cornered Grace in the kitchen. "If anything goes wrong tonight," Charlotte said coldly. "You're finished." Grace nodded quietly. "I understand." But destiny had already written a different ending. Halfway through dinner, a waiter accidentally stumbled. Red wine splashed across the front of Charlotte's designer gown. The ballroom fell silent. Charlotte looked around furiously. Then her eyes landed on Grace. "There she is!" Grace blinked. "I wasn't anywhere near—" "Liar!" Charlotte marched across the room before anyone could stop her. She grabbed Grace's collar. "You've embarrassed me for the last time." The fabric ripped. Every conversation stopped. The orchestra lowered their instruments. Even the photographers forgot to press their cameras, because beneath the torn uniform was a scar Ethan Carter never imagined seeing again. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered across the marble floor. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." What Ethan remembered next would leave every person in that ballroom speechless. Ethan stood motionless. The broken glass at his feet no longer mattered. Neither did the music. Neither did the hundreds of guests watching him. His eyes were fixed on the scar across Grace Bennett's shoulder. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I know that scar." Grace slowly covered her shoulder with the torn fabric, wishing she could disappear. Charlotte forced an uneasy laugh. "Ethan, it's just an old scar. You're making far too much of this." But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind had traveled back 12 years, back to a sterile hospital room where every doctor had delivered the same devastating news. Without a compatible donor, he would not survive. He remembered his frightened mother crying in the hallway. He remembered signing papers he barely understood. Then, almost unbelievably, the hospital found a perfect anonymous donor. Someone he had never met. Someone who asked for no recognition. Someone who disappeared as quietly as they had arrived. The surgeon later told him only one thing. "The donor experienced complications after the procedure and asked us never to reveal her identity." That sentence had haunted him for years. He had built charities. He had funded hospital research. He had written letter after letter through the transplant program hoping to thank the stranger. Every request had been respectfully declined. Now that same impossible memory stood only a few feet away. Ethan slowly approached Grace. His voice trembled. "Please tell me your name." She lowered her eyes. "Grace Bennett. Were you volunteering at St. Matthew Medical Center 12 years ago?" Grace's breathing became uneven. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she nodded. "I was." A wave of whispers spread through the ballroom. Charlotte looked from one face to another, completely confused. "What is everyone talking about?" Ethan swallowed hard. "You—" He struggled to finish the sentence. "You were my donor." Grace closed her eyes. "I never wanted you to find out." The room fell completely silent. One of the elderly guests quietly wiped away tears. Emma stared at Grace in disbelief. "You saved Daddy?" Grace looked toward the little girl and smiled gently. "I simply helped someone who needed help." Emma ran forward and wrapped her arms around Grace's waist. "Thank you for giving me my dad." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Charlotte's confidence vanished. She stepped forward nervously. There has to be some mistake. Grace finally spoke about the secret she had carried for over a decade. "I was 23. I worked mornings at the hospital and nights at a grocery store. My family didn't have much, but when they told me I was a match for someone who might die without a transplant, I couldn't walk away. The surgery wasn't easy. I developed complications afterward. I lost weeks of work. The medical bills buried me. I couldn't keep my apartment." She paused, fighting back tears. "My husband and I spent years trying to rebuild our lives. After he passed away, I became a housekeeper because it was the only work I could find while raising Noah." She looked directly at Ethan. "I didn't save your life so you would owe me anything. I wanted you to live. That was enough." Ethan could no longer hold back his emotions. He gently took Grace's hands. "You gave me 12 years. 12 years to build my company. 12 years to become a father. 12 years that I would never have had without you," his voice cracked. "And all this time, you've been serving coffee in my home." Several guests quietly lowered their heads in shame. They remembered every moment Grace had been ignored, every time someone had spoken to her as though she were invisible. Charlotte suddenly reached for Grace. I'm sorry." Grace stepped back. Her expression wasn't angry. It was simply tired. "I've heard those words before. They don't erase what happened."
Charlotte turned desperately toward Ethan. "Please. It was only one mistake." Ethan looked at the engagement ring on her finger. "No. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. You judged someone's worth by the uniform they wore. You humiliated a woman whose courage gave me my future." Slowly, he removed the engagement ring. "I can't spend my life with someone who mistakes kindness for weakness." Charlotte began to cry. But no one defended her. She quietly walked through the enormous ballroom alone. The doors closed behind her. No one followed. Ethan turned back to Grace. "I'm sorry. I should have seen what was happening months ago. I failed you." Grace smiled gently. "You were busy living the life you were given. That's all I ever wanted." Emma squeezed Grace's hand. "Will you still stay with us?" Grace laughed softly through her tears. "I think that's a conversation your father and I should have." The guests applauded. Not because someone had been embarrassed, but because they had witnessed something far more valuable than wealth. They had witnessed gratitude. Over the following weeks, Ethan made changes throughout Carter Industries. Every employee, from executives to custodial staff, received the same respect standards and workplace protections. Grace accepted a new position leading the Carter Foundation's community outreach programs, helping struggling families find housing, childcare, and employment opportunities. For the first time in many years, she no longer worried about paying rent. Noah enrolled in one of the state's best schools. Emma and Noah quickly became close friends. As for Grace, she still hummed the same old church songs. Only now, they sounded a little brighter. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't recognized by medals, titles, or fortunes. Sometimes they're recognized only when the world finally learns the sacrifice hidden beneath an ordinary uniform. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more uplifting stories, and share it with someone who believes kindness is never wasted. Because one act of compassion can change a life, even if the world doesn't discover it until years later.